You know, it's kind of hard to believe that FNAF has gone on all these years. What started off as a small indie horror game in 2014 quickly became a worldwide known horror icon, managing to keep up in popularity all the way till then to now, with no signs of stopping. From the early games that came out only a few months apart of one another, to the more expansive locations, to VR, and even the open world aspects we have today, FNAF has aged a lot, and that's not even tackling the spin offs. So, going by that logic, FNAF must have several satisfying moments in the entire series, right? Well, surprisingly no. While some may point out that being the hard difficulties are satisfying, 50-20 mode being the lead example, they are wrong. Those hard modes are more gratifying than anything, and even that's debatable, as they don't give you much to offer after you complete them. On the other hand, some may point towards some of the FNAF's endings being satisfying, FNAF 6 being the prime example. And while the FNAF 6 ending is very satisfying, it is more than a satisfying ending to the series as a whole than it is a satisfying moment. It comes out of the blue, and we don't really have much involvement in it. And the gameplay doesn't really build up anything of wanting to destroy these animatronics, so it doesn't really make it super satisfying. But still, the FNAF 6 ending is arguably the most satisfying thing that FNAF has given us for a pretty long time. That is, until recently. When Ruin first released, I think it has given us the most satisfying moment in the series to date. And that's right, Ruin's ending is not what I'll be talking about in this video. While these endings and the mimic scenes are fine and fun change sequences, they aren't the satisfying moment Ruin has to offer, and definitely not the one I'm talking about. Instead, I want to touch on a little moment that happens close to the ending. That's right, Mex's defeat is what I think to be the most satisfying moment in this series so far. And in this video, I will probably be presenting why that is the case. But before I can tackle about what makes defeating Mexes so satisfying, I feel like I have to first go into touching into why he is a satisfying character, but even before that, I feel like I have to explain what he contributes out throughout the story. While Mexes does appear in the first chapter of the game, it still does take a bit for us to encounter him for the first time. As we begin our playthrough, we get to take in the more horror elements of this game, and the dilapidated place in general. We get some brief jump scares by Monty and Chica, and while they are much more damaged than the earlier game, they are still the glam rocks we know and love. The prologue allows us to know that there are indeed still threats, but we don't really think that there will be much besides the glam rocks, at least for the first few chapters. However, that all changes when we get our hands on the Vanny Mask. We are then soon taught that the Vanny Mask allows us to walk through walls and later find and deactivate security nodes. We know that there has to be some sort of limitation to the Vanny Mask, however, we don't know what yet. After we deactivate our first parent node, we get to see what that limitation is. We make our way to the second parent node only for Hopi, the guy that has been recently introduced to us, informs us that there's a hostile entity nearby. This is when we get our first introduction to Mexes. The setup to this is honestly great. We are already conditioned to having the mask on due to there no being downsides being presented up to this point. So when we go and deactivate our first security node, we are met with a jump scare, and of course, Mexes himself. Now, we all thought this was Glitch Trap. We all did. So, you're gonna hear me bring up some connections that adds to the experience. I mean, come on. It's a glitchy rabbit that seems to be connected to the Vanny Mask. What do you expect, us to not connect the dots? Anyways, weird tangent, but I got spoiled for Mix's slash Glitch Trap's design. I thought I got the ending entirely ruined for me. But seeing this and realizing that he is in fact a early gameplay feature, you can't even begin to imagine my joy. Anyways, weird tangent aside, we are told by Gregory that Mexus is contacting Monty, sending him over to try and kill us. And soon enough, after we deactivate some of the main security nodes that are in the area, we get our nice little run-in with Monty, and we continue our adventure. Now taking off the mask more frequently as we are afraid by Mexus and the danger he proposes. Mexus continues with the usual stalking kind of gameplay as we go around and find and deactivate security nodes, but nothing much else is introduced, that is until we make our way to the daycare center, where we are introduced to a brand new mechanic. Well, sort of brand new. This new mechanic makes things extremely more tense as we are forced to find things on the camera station before Mexus tries and kills us. Now, the reason I say almost new is because this camera station provides the same kind of stress as the parent node puzzles, with us trying to figure out and complete a task before Mexus comes and summons an animatronic to kill us. The main difference between these two mechanics is that this mechanic feels just more stressful at times. Instead of the paranoid that allows us to do a little piece of the puzzle at a time, this mechanic forces us to complete the entire thing. However, we continue on the daycare. As we go around the structures, we get to see Mexus stalking us and looking at us very maliciously as we complete our tasks. Soon enough, we eventually come and enter Monty's catwalks, where Mexus seems all the more eager and frightening, but during his pursuit of us, we do get the upper hand at times, even if it is in frightening circumstances.
What happened to it?
But after we finish the Monty ride and complete a few puzzles, we are introduced to yet another mechanic before we encounter Chica, with some frightening good visuals to boot. This mechanic takes place of inhibitors, which are now ways for mechs to either keep you in or out of AR mode. And trust me, keeping you in is far more terrifying. Along with this, after we escape Chica and turn off the inhibitor, we get to encounter mechs directly, having what I think to be one of the most tense moments in this entire game.
That rabbit thing's back again. You said it was safe here.
Now, with all these sudden mechanics that I have introduced, the game might seem cluttered, but trust me, that's only because I haven't explained what happens in between each and how they are introduced, which, don't worry, I'll get into later. And even then, the next few chapters don't really introduce any new mechanics, but instead, they expand on the difficulty and how the mechanics are used. They even explore the mechanics of mechs and how they can work really well when paired up with different characters. The best example of these being in Rockstar Raceway, where we have to run and deactivate parent nodes after turning off inhibitors, and even a final 10 scene with the anomaly thing that I mentioned earlier. Now, after you get all these nice little puzzles and essentially complete our adventure, we finish most of Chapter 9, and we start entering this old, never seen before pizzeria, as we then come over and finally defeat Mexes. And if you somehow have a short attention span, here, let me play it for you again. Now, I will admit that thinking Mex's is glitch trap makes this seem a bit more impactful, making it not only a satisfying moment, but a satisfying ending. But nonetheless, defeating Mex's while knowing he isn't glitch trap still allows for a great experience, and that is due to how satisfying of an antagonist Mex's really is. So, let's get on with that. Now, while a lot of why Mex's gameplay is satisfying can blend in with story, I still feel like there's enough to talk about his mechanics and gameplay that allows me to separate the two. Mexus is obviously a recurring enemy in the game, and while I didn't focus a lot on him in the later chapters, that doesn't mean he isn't there. He is still very much there, and very much menacing. This makes sense when I started to realize that Mexus is what is known as a stalker enemy. While this specific enemy type is usually found within survival horror games, with Nemesis, Pyramid Head, and many more being examples, they still can be found in other games, but they might lack some of the features that are more commonly presented. And while Mexus isn't the first stalker enemy FNAF has done, it is the best so far, and thus makes him have a great presence throughout the game. One major thing to notice about Mexus is that he is extremely different from the rest of the roster. Entirely unique, in fact. Due to this, Mexus is constantly on the player's mind whenever they put on the mask. Every time we enter AR mode to find child nodes, deactivate parent nodes, and more, we remind ourselves of his presence, and if we don't do it, he for sure will do it himself. Every time we walk into a node and deactivate it, the wait for the deactivation to finish feels weirdly greatly suspenseful. While Mexus doesn't really kill the player right away, the player conditions themselves into thinking that will be the case. And even if this is not the case, when Mexus does catch up to you and summons the animatronics, they make this section 10 times harder. Finding the child nodes feels very odd the first time around, however, the player does increasingly get better at it, and thus the situation becomes easier and easier. The same, however, cannot be said for parent nodes and anomaly detecting. Both of these puzzle-based tasks require much time to complete and are once forced in AR mode. Doing these tasks is already suspenseful, so not panicking whenever you hear this is most certainly a tough challenge. And just about when we got used to doing these things on our own accord, having the safety and comfort of being able to strategize and build up our courage to do it, the game throws us a curveball. Curveballs that force us to play by Mex's rules, which are extremely stressful. The game builds up the mechanics Mexus has, and then expands upon them, while still letting Mexus be seen as more of a mastermind kind of figure. You might think that the lack of Mexus in the later chapters takes away from Mexus being a mastermind, but for me, the execution makes it far from it. Mexus is still around, and his presence is still known, but he just isn't the main focus, but instead acts as a mastermind and a supporter for the other animatronics. The mechanics he has are mostly to nerf the player's abilities. He limits the amount of time you can be in AR mode, he forces you to keep your mask off, and more to boot. He acts as a way to make situations much harder if we didn't have those restraints, which built up some form of hatred for him. The gameplay of it is a war of attrition and tactics. We adapt to Mexus, and Mexus adapts to us. And when the moment strikes and Mexus does become a direct threat, it likely will lead to our death since we weren't prepared for it as we usually would be. We need to adapt to where he is and what he's doing, which makes this battle of attrition that has been going on the entire game have such a great send-off as we finally manage to defeat him. But there is still one key aspect of him that makes his death very satisfying, one that I haven't touched on yet. And that is, of course, the story, with some bleed into gameplay. As I have said before, Maxis is seen as a mastermind kind of figure throughout the entire game, with his constant use of the animatronics as minions and much more, echoing that kind of figure. However, now that we are in the story part of this video, I feel like I can give more reasons as to why that is and how it progresses. The first we see of Mexus, we immediately know he is the big bad of this game. Ignoring the fact that we think that he is Glitch Trap, his design just emanates the main antagonist's energy. His rabbit-like features echo the parent nodes, and the fully formed body of his stands out in the AR mode, which usually shows everything as hollow grids or just more glitchy versions of what's in the real world. His design just lets us know that he is in control of the system, his bright smile being one that is extremely mischievous, like he is just playing with us while he gets a chance to and we are in his domain. His introduction is no slouch either. He starts off by catching us off guard and summoning Monty to do his dirty work. But before he even summons Monty, he takes the time to just stare at us, relishing in our confusion and fear as we contemplate what he is supposed to be and what he's doing here. All of this to show that he is the one who controls the world that we are trespassing just feels so amazingly extra. Each section we pass makes him more active and prone to toying with us. Moments like the daycare having him stalking us in an almost mockerish tone with that sickening smile of his. This culminates as we enter the catwalks, with Mex's toying with us still being incredibly frightening as we are forced to use the mask more to look and navigate the area. And we eventually find this new way of transportation and getting from place to place, the portals. And just as we enter our second one of these, we are greeted to Mexus meeting us there. Mexus has had his fun toying with us, but now he has had his fill and he is ready to watch us suffer. Dread washes over us as we can do nothing but watch him glitch his way over to us, inching closer and closer and faster, when at the very last minute, we are saved. Helping manage to overpower him, but only briefly. Even though we know that this is just a small and brief victory, seeing him being defeated and his cockiness washing away is a moment that I completely and utterly adore. This begins a variety of instances where we get to overcome Mexes at his own game, and with his status as a mastermind and this domain clearly belonging to him, these moments make us feel so gratified as we get to overcome him, making a nice little booyah with each mark we get to make on him. From the inhibitors to his own personal sanctuary, and much more, completing these challenges feels so rewarding as we can make it through them. And I don't even think that it would be nearly as gratifying as if Mexus was just a more traditional enemy. If Mexus instead acted as a way to kill the player in AR mode, with just acting the same as all the other animatronics, these moments wouldn't have felt nearly as gratifying. The chapters where he doesn't do much of anything, but instead sits in the background, still make Mexus a great antagonist. They allow for new threats and new mechanics to be explored that Mexus can combine with. These get to show on how adaptive and unpredictable he will be throughout the entire game, preventing him from feeling just like another boring old routine. Throughout everything, he is mostly always there, with his mechanics constantly presenting new threats as he constantly changes to adapt to any situation he's in, making him a great adversary to face off against. The moment where we can finally banish him for good is one that we have been waiting for, and the execution of it is honestly great. We ready ourselves for our final battle as he grows out of the machine and extends his hand ready to grab us, before his rare expression of fear paints all over his face, an expression that we adore to see. Every moment we get to overcome his challenges feels extremely satisfying, and when we get to witness his death right after he is so confident, feels like a nice little booyah that even after we realize it's not the complete end and we are shown that Gregory isn't who he says he is, the feeling of beating him marks the height of our experience. The defeat of Mexus might not be the end to the game, but it is the ending to the war of attrition it took us to get to this one moment, and makes it feel like the end of our playthrough. Ruin is 100% a great installment to this series. Everything from the visuals to the horror to the gameplay to so much more. But Mexus is what I feel like ties this game together. I feel like it has been what FNAF has been wanting to accomplish when it came to overarching threats. Providing a threat that encounters the most important mechanic in the game, and one that is extremely menacing to add. Mexus adding a nice little spin to the enemies we have already faced, making them feel brand new. Every moment he has the upper hand or makes the situation harder, we feel more and more determined to defeat him. And for all of this to end in the culmination where our determinism pays off as we finally finish him off is a satisfying that feels extremely gratifying. I'm not going to act like being the most satisfying moment in the entire FNAF series is a great accomplishment, or an extremely impressive one at that, but it still feels great, and Mexus certainly outdoes everything that we have seen up to this point. I hope that FNAF continues with the great content like it did with Ruin in the future. Many of the future games in the series probably will even be better than Ruin, but for me at least, it will take a lot of work to make a satisfying moment that is more satisfying than beating Mexis.